I watched in horror as Sheriff Corinne yanked the metal ramps from under my son's wheelchair, sending him tumbling backward onto the concrete. The sound of his cry still echoes in my nightmares. She stood over him, badge gleaming in the morning sun, and said the words that changed everything. Property violation. Consider this confiscated. What she did not know was that in 3 hours, she would walk into my scrap yard with those same ramps, trying to sell them for $50 cash. That was her first mistake. Her last mistake was underestimating a parent's love. My name is Marcus, and I never thought I would become the kind of person who fights back against the system. I was always the quiet type. Keep your head down, work hard, stay out of trouble. That was my motto for 38 years of life. Everything changed when my son Danny was born. The doctors told us he would never walk. Spina bifida, they called it, a condition that would keep him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. My wife Sarah and I made a promise that day in the hospital. We would give Danny every opportunity to live a full, independent life. Sarah passed away when Danny turned 8. Cancer took her fast, leaving me to raise our boy alone. The insurance barely covered her medical bills. I worked 2 jobs just to keep our small house in Millbrook, a town so small that everyone knew everyone else's business. The wheelchair ramp became my obsession. Danny was getting older, stronger, more independent. But our front porch had 4 steep steps that made getting in and out of the house a daily struggle. I would carry him up and down those steps multiple times a day, but I knew he needed his freedom. I saved every penny for 2 years. When I finally had enough money for materials, the whole community pitched in. My neighbor Jim brought his tools. Mrs. Patterson from the church organized a fundraiser. Even teenagers from the high school showed up on a Saturday morning to help build. It took us 3 weekends, but we built the most beautiful wheelchair ramp you ever saw. Painted white with blue trim, it curved gently from our front door to the sidewalk. Danny cried the first time he rolled down it by himself. He was finally free to come and go as he pleased. "Dad, I can go anywhere now," he said, his face glowing with pride. That ramp represented everything good about our little town. Neighbors helping neighbors. Community coming together for a child in need. It was more than just wood and metal. It was hope built into a structure. Sheriff Corinne arrived in Millbrook about 6 months after we finished the ramp. She transferred from the city, claiming she wanted a quieter life in a small town. She seemed professional enough at first. Attended community meetings, shook hands at the diner, smiled at the right moments. But there was something in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. A hunger for control that seemed too big for a town like ours. She looked at people like they were problems to be solved rather than neighbors to be served. I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning. Sheriff Corinne started small. Traffic stops for going 2 miles over the speed limit. Parking tickets for being 3 minutes past the meter. Property inspections for grass that was supposedly too long. She turned law enforcement into a game of petty harassment. My first real encounter with her happened on a Tuesday morning in October. I was loading Danny into our van for school when her patrol car pulled into my driveway. She stepped out wearing those mirrored sunglasses that hide a person's soul. "Morning, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying false authority. "I need to talk to you about your property modifications." I felt my stomach drop. "What modifications?" She pointed at Danny's ramp with her pen. "That structure. Do you have permits for that construction?" "It's a wheelchair ramp," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My son needs it to get in and out of the house." "I understand that, but city code requires permits for any structure that modifies the original property line. This ramp extends past your porch onto city easement. I looked at the ramp we had measured so carefully. It ended a full 3 feet before the sidewalk, well within our property boundaries. Sheriff, that ramp does not touch city property. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. I will be the judge of that, Mr. Thompson. I suggest you look into proper permits before this becomes a bigger problem. Danny watched the entire exchange from the van, his 11-year-old eyes wide with worry. After she left, he asked the question that broke my heart. Dad, are they going to take away my ramp? No, son, I said, hoping I was telling the truth. No one is going to take away your ramp. Word traveled fast in Millbrook. By the end of the week, I heard similar stories from other residents. Mrs. Chen got cited for her garden gnomes being a public distraction. The Martinez family received a warning about their children's bicycles being stored improperly in their own yard. She's got it out for anyone who stands out, Jim told me over coffee at the diner. Anyone who does not bow down and kiss her badge. But why? I asked. What does she gain from harassing families? Jim shrugged. Some people just like power, and when you give someone like that a badge and a gun, they think they own the whole world. I tried to stay optimistic. Maybe Sheriff Corinne was just adjusting to small-town life. Maybe she would calm down once she realized we were not criminals, just ordinary people trying to live our lives. I was wrong about that too. The visits became more frequent. She would drive by our house twice a day, slowing down to stare at the ramp. Sometimes she would park across the street and watch Danny playing in the yard. It felt like we were living under surveillance in our own neighborhood. Other parents started avoiding me at school pickup. They were afraid that association with our family would put them on Sheriff Corinne's radar. I understood their fear, but it still hurt to watch friendships disappear because of one woman's abuse of power. Danny started having nightmares. He would wake up crying, asking if the police were going to arrest him for using his ramp. An 11-year-old boy was losing sleep because a grown woman with a badge was terrorizing our family. That was when I knew things were going to get much worse before they got better. December brought snow and Sheriff Corinne's full transformation into a small-town tyrant. What started as petty harassment became a systematic campaign to destroy my family's peace of mind. She was no longer pretending to be a professional law enforcement officer. She was showing her true colors as a bully with legal authority. The citations started arriving in the mail twice a week. Improper snow removal from a sidewalk I had cleared that morning. Failure to display house numbers prominently enough, despite the same numbers being visible for 15 years. Vehicle registration irregularities that my mechanic assured me were completely fabricated. Each citation came with fines ranging from $50 to $200, money I did not have, money that should have been going toward Danny's physical therapy and medical equipment. This is harassment, I told her during one of her surprise property inspections. You are targeting my family for no legal reason. She stood in my driveway, clipboard in hand, writing notes about imaginary violations. Mr. Thompson, I am simply enforcing the law equally for all citizens of Millbrook. If you have a problem with that, you are welcome to file a complaint with the city council. I did file a complaint, 3 of them actually. Each one disappeared into a bureaucratic black hole. The city council members were either too afraid of Sheriff Corinne or too impressed by her authority to challenge her behavior. That was when I discovered I was not her only victim. She had been systematically targeting anyone in town who showed independence or community spirit. The family that organized the annual Christmas festival got cited for noise violations during their planning meetings. The volunteer firefighters received surprise inspections that found safety violations in equipment that had passed state inspection just months before. But her focus always returned to our family, to Danny's ramp. "She drives by here 6 times a day now," Danny told me one evening as we watched her patrol car creep past our window. "She stares at my ramp like it personally insulted her." The boy was 12 years old and already understood that we were living under the attention of someone who wished us harm. No child should have to develop that kind of awareness. I started researching Sheriff Karen's background. What I found made my blood run cold. She had been forced to resign from her previous position in the city after multiple complaints of excessive force and harassment. The official records were sealed, but local newspaper archives told the story of a police officer who used her authority to settle personal grudges. Millbrook had hired damaged goods, a woman who saw law enforcement as an opportunity for personal revenge rather than public service. The breaking point came on a cold January morning. I was helping Danny get ready for school when Sheriff Karen knocked on our front door. Not the polite knock of a neighbor, but the demanding bang of someone who expected immediate compliance. "Mr. Thompson, I need to discuss your continued violation of city building codes." I opened the door but did not invite her inside. "What violation?" She handed me an official-looking document. "This is a formal notice. Your wheelchair ramp was constructed without proper permits and extends onto city easement. You have 30 days to remove it or face legal action." The document was filled with legal language designed to intimidate, but the bottom line was clear. She wanted Danny's ramp destroyed. "Sheriff, that ramp is medically necessary for my disabled son. It was built entirely on my property with community volunteer labor. There is no violation here." Her smile was pure venom. "The law is the law, Mr. Thompson. 30 days. Danny heard the entire conversation from his bedroom. When she left, I found him crying into his pillow. "She is going to take away my freedom, isn't she, Dad?" I held my son and made a promise I was not sure I could keep. "No one is going to take away your ramp, Danny. I will fight this with everything I have." But deep down, I was starting to realize that fighting fair against someone who rewrote the rules might not be enough. I hired a lawyer with money I did not have. Sarah's life insurance policy had a small cash value that I had been saving for Danny's future medical needs. I cashed it out and paid attorney fees instead. Hopping legal representation would protect my son's basic rights. Attorney Mitchell was a decent man who specialized in municipal law. After reviewing Sheriff Karen's documentation, he shook his head in frustration. "Mr. Thompson, these citations are largely baseless. The building code violations she's citing do not actually exist in Millbrook's municipal code. The property easement claims are contradicted by your deed and survey." "So we can fight this?" I asked, feeling hope for the first time in months. "We can fight it, but I have to warn you, fighting corrupt law enforcement in a small town is like swimming upstream in a flood. She has the badge, the authority, and the presumption of legitimacy. We have the law on our side, but that does not always matter." He was right to be pessimistic. Every legal motion we filed was met with escalated harassment. Sheriff Karen began conducting welfare checks at our house, claiming concerned citizens had reported suspicious activity. She would arrive with backup officers, search our property under bogus pretenses, and question Danny about his home life. "Are you being properly cared for?" she would ask him, implying that a single father might be neglecting his disabled child. Danny became withdrawn and anxious. His grades dropped. He stopped playing outside, afraid that Sheriff Karen might show up and accuse him of some imaginary wrongdoing. My happy, independent boy was becoming a prisoner in his own home. The 30-day deadline approached like a death sentence. Attorney Mitchell filed for a temporary restraining order to prevent removal of the ramp pending resolution of our case. The judge denied it, stating that municipal building code enforcement was within Sheriff Karen's authority. Your Honor, Attorney Mitchell argued, this ramp is medically necessary equipment for a disabled child. Removing it would violate the Americans with Disabilities Act and constitute cruel and unusual punishment for imaginary violations. The judge was unmoved. The defendant has 30 days to comply with municipal code or face enforcement action. I sat in that courtroom and watched justice fail my family. The system I had trusted my entire life was protecting the person who was terrorizing my child. That night, I received a phone call that changed everything. Mr. Thompson, this is Carol Martinez. My family received harassment from Sheriff Karen too. I think you should know something about the judge who denied your restraining order. Carol worked as a clerk in the county courthouse. She had access to information that painted a very different picture of our legal proceedings. Judge Harrison is Sheriff Karen's brother-in-law, she whispered into the phone. They have Sunday dinner together every week. He should have recused himself from your case. The corruption ran deeper than I had imagined. Sheriff Karen was not just abusing her authority as a law enforcement officer. She had family connections throughout the local legal system. We were fighting a rigged game. There's more, Carol continued. I've been tracking her citation patterns. She's targeting families who received community support for disabilities, medical needs, or financial hardship. Anyone who got help from neighbors or showed independence despite challenges. The pattern was sickening but clear. Sheriff Karen was systematically destroying the community spirit that made Millbrook special. She was punishing people for helping each other and for refusing to be victims of circumstance. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because what she's doing to your son is evil, and because someone needs to stop her before she destroys more families. I hung up the phone and stared at Danny's ramp through our living room window. In 3 days, she would have legal authority to take it away. My son would lose his independence because a corrupt cop wanted to flex her power. That was the moment I stopped being a law-abiding citizen who trusted the system. If the system would not protect my child, I would find another way. I just did not know yet that Sheriff Karen was about to hand me the perfect opportunity for justice. The morning of enforcement arrived with cruel irony. It was the first warm day of spring, the kind of day when Danny would normally spend hours outside, rolling up and down his ramp just for the joy of independence. Instead, he sat at our kitchen table, staring at his untouched breakfast while I watched Sheriff Karen's convoy pull into our driveway. She brought 3 deputies and a city maintenance truck with a hydraulic lift. This was not law enforcement. This was a show of force designed to humiliate a disabled child in front of his neighbors. "Daddy, do not let them take my ramp," Danny whispered, his voice breaking with fear. I knelt beside his wheelchair and took his hands. "Son, sometimes grown-ups do terrible things that are not fair, but I promise you this is not over." Sheriff Karen approached our front door with her clipboard and that same venomous smile. She was enjoying this moment. She had been planning it for months. "Mr. Thompson, your 30 days are up. This structure will be removed immediately for violation of municipal building codes." "Sheriff, this is medical equipment for a disabled child. What you are doing is cruel and illegal." She gestured to the deputies. Begin dismantling the structure. Store the materials for disposal. I will never forget the sound of power tools cutting through the wood and metal that represented our community's love for Danny. The ramp that took 3 weekends to build was destroyed in 45 minutes. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, watching in stunned silence as uniformed officers dismantled a child's independence. Danny sat in the doorway, tears streaming down his face, as his pathway to freedom was reduced to a pile of scrap metal and broken boards. "Where are you taking the materials?" I asked, though I already knew the answer did not matter. The damage was done. "City property now," Sheriff Corinne replied. "Will be disposed of through appropriate channels." She was lying, of course. Municipal disposal would have meant the materials went to the city dump or recycling center. But I had learned not to expect honesty from someone who terrorized children for personal satisfaction. The deputies loaded the dismantled ramp into the maintenance truck like it was ordinary construction waste. 4 months of harassment and legal manipulation had led to this moment. A disabled boy trapped in his own home because a corrupt cop wanted to prove she had ultimate power. After they left, I carried Danny up our front steps. He felt heavier than usual, not because of his physical weight, but because of the emotional burden we both carried. The steps that had once been a minor inconvenience were now a daily reminder of what Sheriff Corinne had stolen from us. "Will I ever have my ramp back?" Danny asked that night as I tucked him into bed. "Yes," I promised him. "I do not know how yet, but yes." The next morning, I drove through town trying to process what had happened to our family. That was when I saw Sheriff Corinne's patrol car parked outside Peterson's scrap and salvage on the industrial side of town. Curiosity made me pull over and watch from a distance. Sheriff Corinne emerged from the scrap yard office, counting cash in her hands. Behind her, Tom Peterson's forklift was unloading familiar materials from the back of a pickup truck. The white-painted wood with blue trim, the metal railings, the support posts that had been carefully measured and cut to accommodate Danny's specific needs. Sheriff Corinne had not disposed of Danny's ramp through appropriate municipal channels. She had sold it to a scrapyard for personal profit. She had stolen medical equipment from a disabled child and sold it for cash. I sat in my truck, watching this corrupt cop count money earned from my son's suffering, and felt something change inside me. The rage was so pure and focused that it burned away my fear and replaced it with absolute determination. But as I watched her drive away, something else occurred to me, something that made me smile for the first time in months. Peterson's Scrap and Salvage was not just any scrap yard. Tom Peterson had sold the business 6 months ago when his arthritis made the physical work too difficult. The new owner had kept the same name and most of the same employees, but the ownership had definitely changed. The new owner was someone Sheriff Corinne had never bothered to research, someone she had dismissed as just another victim of her harassment campaign. The new owner was me. I had purchased Peterson's Scrap and Salvage as an investment opportunity 3 years earlier, long before Sheriff Corinne arrived in Millbrook. Tom Peterson was ready to retire, and I saw an opportunity to supplement my income with a business that practically ran itself. Most of the work was handled by Tom's experienced crew, and I only visited the yard once a week to review the books. It was steady, honest income from recycling metal and salvaging construction materials. Nothing glamorous, but it helped pay for Danny's medical expenses and physical therapy. Sheriff Corinne's harassment campaign had kept me so busy fighting citations and legal battles that I had barely thought about the scrap yard in months. But now, sitting in my truck and watching her count money from selling my son's ramp, I realized she had just made the most expensive mistake of her life. I drove straight to the scrap yard and found my foreman, Miguel Santos, cataloging the morning's acquisitions. "Miguel, the materials that Sheriff brought in this morning, where are they?" He pointed to a sorted pile near the metal processing area. "Right over there, boss." She said it was municipal property disposal, but she wanted cash payment instead of the usual city account invoice. Seemed strange to me. I examined the dismantled ramp pieces. Every board, every bolt, every support bracket that had been carefully installed to give Danny his independence. Now it was just inventory in my own scrap yard, sold to me by the woman who had stolen it from my son. "Miguel, I need you to document everything about this transaction. Time, date, payment method, the sheriff's statements about municipal disposal. Write down every detail you can remember." Miguel was confused but compliant. "Is there a problem, Mr. Thompson?" "A big problem. Sheriff Karen just sold me stolen property. She took medical equipment from my disabled son and sold it for personal profit." The documentation revealed the scope of Sheriff Karen's corruption. This was not her first visit to my scrap yard. Over the past 6 months, she had sold materials from at least 12 municipal code enforcement actions. Garden sheds, playground equipment, fencing, decorative structures that families had built with their own money and labor. She had turned law enforcement into a personal business opportunity. I spent the next week quietly investigating every transaction, cross-referencing the materials with citation records, and talking to other families who had been targeted. The pattern was clear and criminal. Sheriff Karen was systematically confiscating personal property under bogus legal pretenses, then selling it for cash profit. Mrs. Chen's garden shed that violated setback requirements sold to my scrapyard for $60. The Martinez family's playground that constituted an attractive nuisance sold for $45. A dozen other thefts disguised as law enforcement. But Danny's ramp was different. Medical equipment for a disabled child carried additional legal protections under federal disability rights law. Taking it was not just theft, it was a hate crime. I contacted every family who had been victimized and collected their stories. What emerged was a picture of systematic corruption that went far beyond petty harassment. Sheriff Karen was running a criminal enterprise under cover of her badge. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed more than just documentation. I needed witnesses. I needed her caught in the act with undeniable proof that would survive any attempt at cover-up or legal manipulation. That was when I developed the plan that would end Sheriff Karen's reign of terror forever. I called Miguel and asked him to notify me immediately the next time Sheriff Karen brought materials to the scrap yard. Then I contacted every victim family and asked them to be ready for a phone call that would give them front-row seats to justice. Finally, I called the regional FBI office and reported systematic civil rights violations by a local law enforcement officer. They were very interested in my evidence and agreed to coordinate their investigation with my plan. Sheriff Karen had underestimated the power of community organization. She was about to learn that some mistakes cannot be covered up with a badge. The call came on a Thursday morning in May. Miguel's voice was excited as he whispered into the phone. "Boss, she's here again. Sheriff Karen just pulled up with another load. She's trying to sell what looks like a kid's swing set." I had been waiting for this moment for 3 weeks. Every piece of evidence was documented. Every victim family was on standby. The FBI had an agent positioned nearby, and I had a digital recorder in my pocket. Miguel, keep her there as long as possible. Tell her you need to inspect the materials for safety violations or something. I will be there in 10 minutes. I drove to the scrap yard with my heart pounding, but not from fear. This was the feeling of justice finally arriving after months of helpless rage. Sheriff Karen was about to discover that her victims were not as powerless as she believed. I parked behind the main office building where my truck would not be visible from the transaction area. Through the window, I could see Sheriff Karen haggling with Miguel over the price of a wooden swing set that some family had built for their children. I stepped outside and walked casually toward the transaction area, pulling out my phone to record video as I approached. "Good morning, Sheriff Karen," I called out in my friendliest voice. She turned around with that familiar arrogant smile, expecting to see another intimidated citizen. The smile disappeared when she recognized me. "Mr. Thompson, what are you doing here?" "Well, this is my scrap yard. I own Peterson's Scrap and Salvage, have owned it for about 3 years now." The color drained from her face as she realized the implications. She looked at the swing set she was trying to sell, then at Miguel, then back at me. The pieces were falling into place in her mind. "Your scrap yard." "That's right. Which means you have been selling me stolen property for the past 6 months, including my son's wheelchair ramp that you confiscated under bogus municipal code violations." Sheriff Karen tried to recover her authority. Those were legitimate enforcement actions, municipal property disposal through approved vendors. I pulled out a folder of documentation. "Miguel, can you show Sheriff Karen the cash payment receipts for all her previous transactions? The ones where she specifically requested personal payment instead of municipal account invoicing." Miguel handed over the transaction records. Sheriff Karen's hands were shaking as she looked at the evidence of her own corruption. "You see, Sheriff, municipal property disposal doesn't involve cash payments to law enforcement officers. That's called theft and resale of stolen goods. When the stolen goods include medical equipment for disabled children, that becomes a federal civil rights violation." Other people were arriving. Miguel had called the regular customers and employees, creating an audience for Sheriff Karen's exposure. But more importantly, I had called the victim families. Mrs. Chen arrived first, followed by the Martinez family, then others who had been terrorized by Sheriff Karen's harassment campaign. "There's my garden shed," Mrs. Chen said, pointing to materials in the sorted inventory. "The one you said violated setback requirements that do not exist in city code." "And our playground equipment," added Mr. Martinez. "The one you called an attractive nuisance while our kids watched you tear it down." Sheriff Karen was surrounded by her victims, all of them documenting her corruption with phone cameras. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. "You people do not understand municipal law," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She knew she was caught. "Actually, we understand theft," I replied. "We understand abuse of authority, and we understand that federal agencies take civil rights violations very seriously." As if summoned by my words, a black sedan pulled into the scrap yard. FBI agent Rodriguez stepped out, badge visible, and approached our group. "Sheriff Karen Patterson, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI Civil Rights Division. We need to discuss your enforcement practices regarding disabled citizens and property confiscation procedures." Sheriff Karen's expression changed from arrogance to panic as she realized the full scope of her situation. This was not just local embarrassment. This was federal investigation. The woman who had terrorized families, stolen from children, and corrupted law enforcement for personal profit, was finally facing consequences that her badge could not protect her from. Justice had arrived at Peterson's scrap and salvage. The federal investigation moved swiftly once Agent Rodriguez had Sheriff Coren's confession on record. Faced with overwhelming evidence of systematic civil rights violations, theft of government property, and abuse of authority, she agreed to a plea bargain that would spare her a lengthy trial in exchange for full cooperation. The local newspapers picked up the story, and within days, regional media were covering the Sheriff Coren scrapyard scandal as a cautionary tale about small-town corruption. The story resonated with people who had experienced their own battles against abusive authority figures. Sheriff Coren was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all victims. More importantly, she was permanently barred from law enforcement and required to forfeit her pension and benefits. The woman who had used her badge to terrorize families would never again have authority over innocent people. But the legal consequences were only the beginning of Sheriff Coren's punishment. In a town as small as Millbrook, reputation is everything. She became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power corrupts someone completely. Her name became synonymous with abuse of authority and cruelty toward children. The community response was overwhelming. Once people learned the full scope of Sheriff Coren's crimes, they organized the largest volunteer effort in Millbrook's history. Within 2 weeks, Danny had not just a new wheelchair ramp, but a completely renovated accessibility system. The new ramp was wider, longer, and included handrails and safety features that exceeded anything we had originally imagined. The local contractor donated materials. High school students provided labor as part of a community service project. Even families who had been afraid to associate with us during Sheriff Coren's harassment campaign showed up to help. "Dad, this is even better than my old ramp," Danny said as he rolled down the new structure for the first time. "It's like the whole town built it just for me." "They did build it for you, son. That's what good people do when they see injustice. They come together and make things right." The investigation also revealed corruption in other areas of local government. Judge Harrison was forced to recuse himself from all cases involving law enforcement after his family relationship with Sheriff Coren became public knowledge. The city council implemented new oversight procedures for municipal code enforcement and property confiscation. Most importantly, Millbrook hired a new sheriff who understood that law enforcement means serving the community, not terrorizing it. Sheriff Williams was a 20-year veteran with a spotless record and a commitment to constitutional policing. His first official act was apologizing to every family that had been victimized by his predecessor. "I kept Peterson's scrap and salvage, but I donated all the materials that Sheriff Coren had stolen back to their original owners." Mrs. Chen rebuilt her garden. The Martinez family reinstalled their playground. Families throughout Millbrook reclaimed the property that had been taken from them under false pretenses. Danny returned to being the happy, confident boy he had been before Sheriff Coren's harassment campaign. His grades improved, his nightmares stopped, and he began talking about his future with the same optimism that had always defined his character. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to help kids like me," he told me one evening as we watched the sunset from his new ramp. "Kids who need people to fight for them when bad people try to hurt them." "You will help a lot of people, Danny. You already have. Your courage and strength inspired this whole community to stand up against corruption." The story of Sheriff Coren and Danny's ramp became a local legend, passed down as a reminder that justice sometimes comes from unexpected places. It showed that ordinary people have the power to fight back against corruption when they work together and refuse to be intimidated by badges and authority. But for me, the most important lesson was simpler. Sometimes protecting the people you love requires becoming someone you never thought you could be. Sometimes justice requires patience, planning, and the willingness to fight back when the system fails. Sheriff Corinne tried to steal my son's independence. Instead, she gave our entire community something more valuable: the knowledge that we could protect each other from anyone who tried to abuse their power. The ramp she destroyed became a symbol of community strength. The corruption she represented became a cautionary tale, and the fear she spread became the foundation for a justice that would protect future generations from similar abuse. In the end, Sheriff Corinne's biggest mistake was not recognizing that she was fighting a father's love, and that is a battle no corrupt cop can ever win.